Welcome to the Vitamentality podcast. I'm your host, Angel Munro. We're talking all things health and wellness, and we're looking at ways to live a vital life. Short disclaimer, this is not intended as medical advice. This is just for general purposes only. So this week we're doing a Q&A. I'd gathered some questions from listeners and clients and customers a few weeks ago. I was meant to do this a few weeks ago, but I got sick and had some other stuff going on. So apologies for the delay. This is the first Q&A, so we'll see how it goes. And yeah, I'm just going to cycle through the questions. So the first question was, do you have any information on portion size? And I didn't have a standard handout that I give to people, to clients, because it's so individual depending on the person's age and body type and lifestyle and stress levels, what their daily requirements are going to be. Everyone is different. And yeah, so I think it's difficult, but I'm going to just go through some of the things that I would think about. So first of all is actually how many meals a day someone would have. 3 is the standard, or 3 and a couple of snacks, but for some people that will be good. For some people that's too much. For some people it should just be 3, no snacking. For some people do well on 2 meals and some people do well on 1. And, that is a real individual process that you have to go through to work out which one is for you. And generally, if people are doing 1 meal a day, they're having a very nutrient dense meal that has a lot of good fats and things in there too, but that's definitely not going to work for everyone, like I said. But there's a few things like timing. No one should really be eating when the sun goes down. We really should be eating at daylight hours. That's when our metabolism is going to be best. So yeah, timing's definitely part of it. And the other thing is, whether it's whole food or not. There was this study that was done recently, actually. It was 55 adults, and they were split into 2 groups, and 2 groups. One of the groups had processed food, the other group had whole food diet, but the nutrient makeup was exactly the same. The only difference was whether it was processed or non-processed. And they tested for blood lipids and appetites and cravings and energy intake and visceral fat and weight loss. And the group that were on the whole food diet, or the minimally processed food, they called it, they did much better. So it just shows that, you can't replicate nature, break up food into its chemical parts, and then, give it to someone and have the same result as what nature would provide. So that's definitely an important point. Everyone should be on a whole food diet, really minimal processing, but you also can put on weight eating good food, and I certainly can have done so in the past, if we can overeat and not move enough. So so when it comes to actual portion sizes of each meal, if we're looking at a general kind of dinner plate, there's a really basic guideline, mainstream guideline that kind of works, where it's, you use the hand as the guide. And so like leafy greens would be a whole hand's worth, so that would take up half the plate, and then the other quarter of the plate would be carbohydrates, kind of like a fist size. So we're talking rice, pasta, starchy carbs, like starchy carby vegetables like potato, pumpkin, sweet potato, and then a palm size of protein. If you're eating vegetarian and you're having legumes and a carbohydrate, you might just have the other half of the plate just legumes, or you might do the palm size, so a bit smaller carbohydrate, and then the legumes, the fist size. That's a very, very general guide. But the other thing to consider is what season it is, because if you're eating seasonally, you would have more carbohydrates in the form of fruits and vegetables in the summer, and more animal fats and proteins and legumes and things like that in the winter. So the meal sizes are probably going to be a little bit bigger in the summer because of the volume of the food. And when we look at deuterium, which is it's a hydrogen, they call it like it's a hydrogen isotope, like a heavy hydrogen. It's actually a pretty good marker because yet it kind of really justifies isn't the right word, but gives credence to the idea of eating seasonally, because in summer, the things like watermelons and tomatoes and, all the fruits and vegetables that you can think of in summer that are watery, they have higher deuterium than, say, like butter or eggs. And we actually burn through a lot of deuterium in summer because of sweating and UV light. So we need more deuterium. So nature kind of provides us with more of it in the summer. And that's when, so for me personally, in summer, I might have a bigger plate for breakfast than usual because I would have more fruits and watery, deuterium-rich foods in the summer. And then in winter, I might have a smaller meal, have less deuterium, might have some scrambled eggs and some sauerkraut and a bit of avocado or something, and that will be a much smaller plate. So that's, when you start looking at that way, that's when plate size can be a little bit deceiving. But yeah, like I said, when in doubt, use the hand tool. And the other point that I wanted to make was intermittent fasting. So I guess that ties into how often you're eating, because if you were doing, the 1 meal a day or the 2 meals a day rather than 3, then that would be considered intermittent fasting. There's conflicting evidence on intermittent fasting, and I think that's just, personally, I think it's because it works for some people and it doesn't for others. So, don't be afraid to play around with timing of meals, how many meals you having a day. And, if you're having problems with weight, definitely move more and eat a little bit less and play around with timing, play around with intermittent fasting a little bit. And, if it doesn't work, then you change it. That's, I think that's, everyone needs to experiment a little bit with their diet to work out what works for them. And you definitely don't base it on what the person next to you is doing. But yeah, when in doubt, go a little bit less. It's not going to kill you for sure. Next question was, what vitamins are we most deficient in? So I'm not sure whether the person that wrote this, if they meant to say what nutrients are we most deficient in, or if they meant vitamins specifically. So I'm going to answer this in 4 parts, or a few parts. We'll see how many parts we get. So I think we're actually much more deficient in minerals than anything else. I think that's the thing to worry about. I think that's because of farming practices. Also, a lot of people eat conventional food, not organic food. But even if you eat organic food, we end up getting pesticides in the waterways, and it's very hard to avoid, and it really degrades the gut lining and means that we lose a lot of minerals in digestion. So filtering your water and eating as much organic food as possible is the best way to get more minerals. And conventional food and organic food, in terms of its actual mineral content within the food, they have a little bit less minerals in conventional food, not a lot. But the bigger problem is the degradation of the gut lining, that you're not uptaking minerals as much. Certainly also, farming practices where they do use pesticides and they use artificial fertilizers and things, there is less minerals in that soil and it's less diverse. So in terms of boosting that up, as well as just eating organic food, whole food has more minerals than processed food. And then things like organ meat, oysters. I don't eat organ meat. I'm a lifelong vegetarian, but I will take an organ supplement just in a powder, in a capsule. Fulvic minerals. Be careful which ones. I saw one on the shop that I think is really good. Some of them are processed, that's why. Shilajit, again, you got to be careful of the quality, but Shilajit works as well. And the more heavy metals and the more pesticides, I said pesticides already, but also the more heavy metals that you end up consuming, they increase your need for minerals. So reducing toxicity, we're deficient in nature and we are in excess of toxicity. So being aware to be careful about how many excess toxins you're bringing into your body in the way of food, and what products you're using on your skin and in your home is really where the focus should be, more than trying to work out and isolate the individual vitamin or mineral that you may or may not be deficient in. And when we do that, when we eat whole food and we make sure that we're reducing our toxic load, that's the best way to avoid deficiency. And yeah, just concentrating on really nutrient dense foods. In terms of vitamins, I was trained to prescribe vitamins, and yeah, that's my profession really. So it was really shocking for me to learn how vitamins are actually isolated and how vitamins are actually made in terms of supplements. And I first learnt this from not from when I studied, after maybe a few years ago, from a researcher and nutritionist, naturopath. He was actually a former senior lecturer. He was one of the top people in that field of nutrition and naturopathy in Australia, and he no longer works in that field as a lecturer anymore. He still is a health researcher. Daniel Reuters, he wrote the book Can You Catch a Cold? And I was doing some professional development with him, and he went over vitamins and how the original isolation papers, when you read them, you can't see a vitamin under a microscope like you can a mineral. To isolate a vitamin, they would get, say, an orange, and then they tip acetate, and then they put lead on it, and that's how they do this process over and over again, and then they get vitamin C. And when they make something like vitamin C, it's in a similar fashion. So to me, they haven't actually isolated anything. They've added a whole lot of chemicals, and you end up with artifacts. Like, there's no way of knowing that is what is actually in an isolated part of that orange. And so that's my long-winded way of saying I don't think we really understand vitamins. We don't really understand the minuscule, invisible parts of foods. And so I think vitamins, I'm just saying that we can't separate them from food. And, there is something, I've spoken about this before, called the food matrix. And most, all scientists can never account for the food matrix. It's kind of, doesn't matter how many times they separate vitamins from food and they try and put things back together in a chemical way, they can never replicate what nature provides. And this is what's called the food matrix. So I don't think we can isolate vitamins. I don't think vitamins are useful. I think fresh food and the connection to nature is what we're deficient in, not any individual vitamins at all. So yeah, and I guess people talk about this as a vitamin D. I think vitamin D, some people say it's vitamin, some people say it's a hormone. When you look at the way they isolate it, similar thing to vitamin C, any of the vitamins. They pour a whole lot of chemicals on a substance, and then they said that they've isolated something, and I don't think it's how it looks like in the body, meaning we don't really understand. But we definitely do understand that no matter how much you supplement with vitamin D, you cannot replicate what the sun does in terms of health outcomes. And with vitamin D, when you take it, there's a toxicity. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we definitely are deficient in the sun. The sunlight on our natural eyes, not through a window outside, it regulates our hormones, it regulates our metabolism, our sleep-wake cycle, every health outcome or any disease it can think of is, everything's positively impacted the more time we spend outside in the sun, safely, of course. So yeah, again, we're deficient in nature, we're deficient in fresh air, we're deficient in sunlight, we're deficient in whole seasonal food. And yeah, I think we need to stop this kind of obsession with breaking things down into their smaller parts. Actually doesn't really help us out and doesn't really help us understand it anymore anyway. The next question was tips on raising kids in a modern society so I'll say that again, tips on raising kids in a modern society to be more health conscious. So when you work this out, let me know. It is, it's a tricky one. I'll try and answer this best I can. I've got two kids, 28 and 17. So I will say, as I'm, really pretty, I think living with me would be difficult because I'm so strong in, how I view health, and it's definitely different to how other families do. A lot of other families do things. So yeah, I think that would have been sometimes annoying for my children. They've definitely told me that. But what I will say is that they definitely did rebel in health ways. They don't always want to be eating the same kind of food that I'm making, or to be as conscientious about the products that we're using in the home. And the 17-year-old is still rebelling a little bit, but the 28-year-old, often will come back and laugh that he does things now, that I had been doing that he kind of rejected, and he found his own way back. And he's actually very disciplined with his health now, with exercising and what he's eating and things, and a lot more conscientious about even what things they're using in the home. So that just comes in time. I've said this thing before, as long as they've got good bones, meaning like you put the foundations down and they work it out for themselves eventually. I think, people have free will, and they have to be able to work things out for themselves and, make mistakes and find out what works for them as an individual. But, that free will applies to everyone. And when you're the person who is running the house, it's completely up to you what food you're cooking with, and what products are being used in the home, how much screen time, all of that stuff. That's up to you, and that's your free will. And then they have the free will to go off and do things differently if they want to. But I think as long as you're, like you have strong convictions, that you live by, as long as they're not imposed all the time, then I think that's, that's the only way to do it. You just have to live well yourself and be a mirror, and they take what they want and what they need, and that's all you can do, I think. Yeah, but again, it's your choice how you run your house. So I know, never compromise on that. And my daughter sometimes buys things like instant noodles and stuff. She'll cook them when I'm not at home. That's her prerogative, her money, she can do it. But yeah, I'm certainly not buying them. And even she's starting to work out, like, if she eats a whole lot of shit food, she feels shit. So yeah, they just have to work it out for themselves. Funnily enough, this is kind of a side story, but I got brought up on a really healthy diet. I actually always ate that way. I didn't really rebel in terms of health that much. I rebelled on lots of other things, but never really in health. And even, I guess maybe one of the most shocking rebellious things I did was get pregnant at 18, but it ended up, which was kind of shocking to everyone at the time and seemed crazy, but every good thing in my life happened after doing something that people thought was a mistake. So, I don't think, sometimes, our kids teach us things, and yeah, you kind of got to let them do their thing a little bit, but, just be the best version of yourself. That's how you can't get them to do anything, but the best way you can influence someone is to be the best version of yourself. There's a doctor who probably the only doctor that I regularly agree with what he says is Tom Cowan. He's just written a book called, I can't remember what it's called. I'll put it in the show notes. It was on raising children. I haven't read that book. I've read a lot of his other books, but I've listened to quite a lot of interviews that he's done since he's released the book, and I think there's a lot of gems in there. So I recommend reading that. I think it's in the same vein as what I've been saying, that it's very hard to make a kid do anything, and you probably shouldn't try. But yeah, being a parent's tricky. I ran a kitchen garden program for 4 years. And so in the program, we taught grade 3 and grade 4. So in Australia, that's kind of like 9 to 11-year-olds, children, how to grow their own food on the premises and cook with the food that they grew. And it's really interesting because, some kids came from families where the parents didn't cook and they had pretty bad diets, and they would start off not wanting to eat the food at all. And then by the end of the 2 years, they were eating all kinds of things, and they knew how to cook all kinds of things. So I think getting them involved as much as possible really, really makes a difference as well. Like I've used, I don't know what you call it, like a tagline on my website: connection is prevention. I think one of the reasons why our society is so unwell is our disconnection to nature. And so, if you show people how to be connected to what they're putting in their body, I think it really makes a big difference. And to me, there's no such thing as bad food. There's bad ingredients. And, so if they want a burger, make the burger, make the bread, use the best organic meat that you can get, make the sauce, I guess, or, maybe you won't make everything. You might buy good ingredients, but for some things, but having children grow the food and make the food from scratch, I think that is one of the best things that you can do. And they'll go through a stage where they might not want to do it with you, but yeah, just doing those things as much as possible, getting them as connected as much as possible, especially in the early years. They've got, again, those good bones that they can go back to later on. And yeah, it's a good foundation to lay. So the next question was non-toxic cookware. So I don't think there's lots of brands that bring out non-toxic cookware, and sometimes They're not that good. The classics is the way to go. So stainless steel, cast iron, enamel cast iron, like a Le Creuset pot, carbon steel, and some ceramic and copper. They're the best, just they're the best things to use. There's a website called the Low Tox Project. They've got stainless steel bakeware. Bakeware is difficult to get because often it's got Teflon. Yeah, they're good for bakeware. But in terms of like pots and pans, going to what are they called? Like so wholesale suppliers for restaurants. They often have things like cast iron and carbon steel fry pans. I use both carbon steel fry pan and the cast iron fry pan, they need to be seasoned. So you do that with olive oil and salt, and then they become non-stick. That's what I cook eggs and things like that on. And if I was doing like a sauce or something, I would do it in a stainless steel fry pan. Stainless steel fry pans aren't very good for cooking things like eggs and stuff because it sticks on the bottom, but cast iron, carbon steel, really good for that. Yeah, you can't go wrong with the classics. So don't worry about fussing about with, low tox cookware and ceramics. Sometimes they have chemicals on them. Go for those things that I mentioned. They've been used for hundreds of years and they're non-toxic and they do really well. Sometimes things like the Le Creuset pots, they can be a bit expensive. But like I said, if you go to a wholesale supplier that's open to the public that supplies restaurants and things, you'll find some really good cookware that's not too expensive. Yeah, and this wasn't part of the question, but as an extension to that, in terms of storing food, use glass containers, not plastic. I never use plastic wrap on anything. I often just put leftover things in a bowl with a lid, like a plate that fits on top of the bowl on top. And I use baking paper, very occasionally aluminium. Aluminium isn't good for your health, especially if it's injected into the bloodstream, which it comes in a lot of things that do get injected. And it's bad in cooking if there's an acid on it. But if there's no acid on it, then it's inert. So even aluminium bakeware is not too bad if you don't have anything acidic and you just put baking paper on top of it. It's better than using something with a non-stick Teflon on it. And aluminium, if you had it on some food, I would always put baking paper underneath and then put aluminium on over the top so it's not touching the food directly. But if, people do things like put a piece of fish and then put lemons on top and wrap it in tinfoil and bake it in the oven, that's a bad idea. You're going to get aluminium in your food, which is not good. So aluminium can be used, but you've got to be careful with it. So air fryers was the next question. I don't use one. I don't really think they're necessary. However, if you really want to use an air fryer, the only non-toxic one that I know about in Australia at the moment is the Our Place one. None of this stuff is sponsored, by the way, or anything. I'm just telling you products that I know that's okay. So, yeah, the Our Place air fryer, it's really cute looking. It's only stainless steel inside, and I think they do two sizes, but in Australia we only get the small size and it's quite small. But if I was going to get one, that would be the only one that I would get. You can make an air fryer in your oven. Basically, all it is that it's got air to circulate. So if you use like a wire rack in your oven and you just put baking paper down, so no tray underneath, and you put the food just on the baking paper on the wire rack, that actually works just as good as an air fryer because the air is circulating around the food. And if you have fan forced oven, then that's even better because there's air to to move that around. And if you want to help it, you can kind of crunch the baking paper up a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I think they're a bit of a gimmick, air fryers, but all the other ones have Teflon inside them and forever chemicals. They contribute to cancer, cardiovascular disease, bad fertility. I mean, pretty much anything that you could think of, neurological conditions. Yeah, it's just not worth it. And I don't think there's such thing as bad food, just bad ingredients. Nothing wrong with fat. We need fat, especially women and children need fat. But we need good fats. So, brushing some food with a little bit of olive oil and baking it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I'm often actually more liberal than that with something like olive oil or butter. But if you're using, like a chemical extracted canola oil, then it doesn't matter if it's in an air fryer or in an oven, it's not good. So I think air fryers are a bit of a gimmick. It's much more important to concentrate on what kind of fats that we're using, what quality food that we're using. If we want it crispy, just make sure that there's more air can circulate. Microwaves and their effect on food was the next question. So I have never used a microwave before. My parents never had one. I've never owned one. I've eaten food out of a microwave if someone else has prepared food and heated it up, and restaurants end up using them a lot. But yeah, I've never actively used one before. I really don't see the need for them. There's a lot of conflicting information on whether they're good for your health or bad for your health. But they do degrade B12. Again, B12 is a vitamin, and to find B12, it goes through that same chemical extraction. But just for argument's sake, on the studies that have been done, when they've tested for B12 after microwave use, it's degraded. So not good for vegetarians. Microbes, it kills a lot of microbes, and we're basically bacteria, proteins, and water. So to me, killing microbes is actually not a good thing at all. It's sold often as a plus. I think it's a negative, because there's no distinguishing between what's a good bacteria and what's a bad bacteria. They just all get killed. So that's really bad for the food that you're consuming. Like I said, there's kind of arguments on whether using microwaves cause disease or not. What is clear is that the water in there, when it is looked at, when a photograph is taken and the pattern is examined, the water, the way that it's ordered, is very distorted. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I did a podcast on water. I'll pop it in there. Please listen to it. But water, when it's looked at under a microscope, has patterns to it. And so does the water that comes out of our body. And it should be really beautiful snowflake, leaf flake kind of patterns. And when it goes through certain processes, it is disordered, and microwaves give these awful kind of shard images. Boiling water doesn't do that, and only microwaves do that to the water. And to me, that's a big red flag, because we are, by molecular weight, 99% water. And like I said, the water in our body, like whenever photos have been taken of people's tears and things like that, it has these beautiful snowflake structures to it. So does fruits, the water from fruits and vegetables. So that's the water that we should be aiming to have in our body, and microwaves do not give that to us. Veda Austin has done the experiments on this, so I recommend looking at her work again if what I'm saying is a bit confusing. But the the structure of the water that we're consuming is so important. And yeah, microwaves are not going to give that to you. What else was I going to say about microwaves? Oh, most people heat their food up in plastic containers in microwaves, and hot heat and cold temperatures, they make the plastics leach into the food. So that's one of the another massive problem for using microwaves. For me, I don't understand why you can't just put your food in a pot on the stove or put it in a glass Tupperware container straight into the oven without the lid, of course, if you want to heat up food. They're the two ways to do it. And in terms of, like I said, I've never used it. Even when I've worked at places where there's microwaves and I've taken my own lunch, I'll just take things, if there's no way for me to heat something up on a stove, I'll just take things that I can eat at room temperature, like a roast veggie salad or some boiled eggs and salad or something like that. Don't use them. That's the short answer. The next question was saffron and lion's mane for ADHD. Are they beneficial? So the short answer to that is yes, but it's me, so I'm going to give you a long answer. So I did a talk on autism and ADHD, and I recommend going to have a listen to that if you haven't. I question the whole diagnosis. Not that people are having behavioral neurological problems. That's not what I'm questioning. I'm questioning the disease classification. The only way to diagnose both autism and ADHD, the question's about ADHD though, the way to diagnose is from this test called a DSM-5, and it's basically just a questionnaire. There's no biological tests available. They've never been able to find a test that applies to everyone. So this is why they call it a spectrum. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter if you go to what specialist you go to, they're using this questionnaire called the DSM-5. And if a child fits into these categories after a series of questions, then they can be given this diagnosis. So I go into that in a lot more detail in that last podcast. So please go and listen to it. But what I said in that was, you get someone like, it should just be on an individual basis. So you get someone like Jimmy, he's actually got a heavy metal toxicity. And then you got Sally, who's got poor light environment, or Rudy, who's not getting enough good fats, and maybe too many preservatives in his diet. Or you might get a kid who's got a few of those things going on. There might be trauma or birth trauma or damage from certain pharmaceuticals. There's so many different things that could be going on, and they shouldn't be treated the same. And what happens in the medical system is that they're all given, the same pharmaceuticals. But if you got to the bottom of why they're having these problems in the first place, that's where the treatment lies in. And so in terms of saffron and lion's mane, I'll talk about saffron first. So saffron has a detoxing capacity, and it does offer some kind of certain amount of neuroprotection. It is particularly good at clearing out diazinon, which is a pesticide, and it seems to modulate damage from that pesticide. And it does offer some neuroprotection and enhances memory and learning. And it also has done pretty well in studies as a alternative to fluoxetine, which is prescribed in autism and ADHD for depression. So what I'm trying to say is saffron could be good if it is a child who maybe one of the reasons why he's having this kind of ADHD presentation, these neurological issues, is because he's been exposed to pesticides. So the saffron would work well in correlation with putting that kid on an organic diet. If that's the problem, that he has actually been introduced to too many pesticides and that's what's causing his issues, then saffron could be really good, and as well as doing lifestyle changes that would support that in the future. But just giving any kid saffron is not going to work. So that's why it will work for some kids and not for others. So this is why it's so important to have a look at the whole picture, to do a really, really thorough family history, medical history, lifestyle, diet analysis to work out exactly what the problem is with these children, not just a blanket, we're just treating ADHD. That's not going to work. What works is working out for the child exactly what they need. And so in some cases, yes, saffron would be great because it does offer some neuroprotection to certain chemicals. That chemical, the diazinon, is a pesticide. It's actually been outlawed in Australia as of this month, actually, or actually September 10th. If anyone's caught with that pesticide, they'll face chemical. It will be an offence. Criminal charges, not chemical charges, criminal charges. I think maybe it was like a year or two ago that it came off the market, but people obviously were still in possession of it. So as of the 10th of September this year, people will not be able to use it at all. But a chemical like that stays in the environment. So that is why saffron is good and when it would work well with a child presenting with ADHD symptoms. The other question was lion's mane. The other herb that was asked was lion's mane. It has been shown in studies to improve cognitive functions. It's said to be the terpenoids, and terpenoids generally have a detoxing, regenerative action to them. So I would suggest that that's probably children who have a certain level of toxicity, again, with environmental toxicity, whether it's from pharmaceuticals or environmental toxins, building materials. There's a number of things, again, and you just have to work out with the child, going through their history, what they've been exposed to, and then how to heal from that if that's what's causing issues for that child. So lion's mane definitely can be good, and it's also good for leaky gut, so restoring the gut. And a lot of children presenting with these symptoms often have a gastrointestinal component to it. So so if your child has, or even an adult, has gut issues and problems like retaining memory and stuff, then lion's mane would definitely be good. But again, just having lion's mane on its own without addressing what happened in the first place, and making like appropriate lifestyle changes and using other therapies to heal through that, taking lion's mane alone is not going to be it. There was a study, so there's not a lot of studies on lion's mane specifically to ADHD. There is to other things like Alzheimer's, but looking at what's been done so far, it looks like it could be good for ADHD, but no solid science just on that. But there was a study where two twins who had autism, and again, autism and ADHD, the symptoms in the DSM-5 cross over a lot. So it's appropriate to look at solutions that cover both of them. So these twins that had autism, they actually reversed their symptoms by giving them, there was different kinds of occupational therapy, speech therapy, herbs, supplements, including lion's mane, craniosacral work, removing processed foods and colors and additives and stuff, and they completely reversed their symptoms by having this really comprehensive plan, which included lion's mane. So I it's just such an important point. There never is going to be a quick fix if you really want to get to the bottom of it. Yeah, you really have to look at it really thoroughly, but it's completely possible. And I've heard some people say things like, "Oh, you can't cure autism and ADHD because it's a neurotype." There's absolutely no scientific proof of that, and it is that neurotype, that's a concept. It's not even a hypothesis. It's not even a theory. It's a concept that's got no scientific backing. There's no standardized biological brain scan, nothing conclusive for people who fall into that spectrum. And so any kind of neurological, behavioral, developmental symptoms that someone's presenting with, again, should always be looked at on an individual level, and you can absolutely heal. Absolutely. So the next question was tin foods. I mean, who doesn't like the convenience of using tin food occasionally? But there isn't really a good option. I use them occasionally, of course. But they used to just be aluminium tins, and now they're lined with plastics. And even the ones that say they're BPA free, there's still other harmful plastics. All plastics are harmful. They interfere, they can be carcinogenic, interfere with fertility, metabolism, cardiovascular health, all of the things. So yeah, it's pretty impossible now to even find the aluminium tins that don't have any lining. Occasionally you might find a European one. Again, it's only good, aluminium's only good if it's something that's not acidic. So something like a tomato, there's not really a good option in terms of tin tomatoes. Again, occasionally I'll use them, but you can sometimes find organic chopped tomatoes in a jar, or I might get like a rustic passata, or there's a good organic one that I sometimes get. So if you want like a bit of texture. But yeah, I'll link an article I did. It was a recipe that's on my website, but I went through the steps of how I would prepare legumes like chickpeas and things in bulk and store them in the freezer to use them, and how I defrost them quickly and stuff. So I'll put that link in the show notes. Again, sometimes I'll grab a tin of legumes, like chickpeas or something, if I haven't got a store of them, already cooked in the freezer. But yeah, try to be as organized as possible, because they're just not something that you should be having all the time. And the last question was best soil for growing organic veggies. So the best soil is to care for it. Like I said, I ran a kitchen garden program where I taught cooking, and the kitchen garden program was teaching kids how to cook and grow their own food. And in the time that I was there were 3 gardeners who taught the garden portion of the classes and looked after the garden. And the one that produced the best food spent the most time tending to the compost. So if you want to grow good veggies at home, I think the best thing that you can do is to have good compost. And you can buy organic compost for sure, but yeah, having your own is the best. It's obviously great for the environment. Organic food is what we should all be eating anyway, and it produces the best compost. And because phosphorus and magnesium, but phosphorus is really important for growing really healthy veggies, and there's less phosphorus in conventional food. Plus, again, like I said, pesticides kill microbial life, and you want microbial diversity for good compost. If you want lots of worms and stuff like that, you don't want chemicals in there. They're not going to thrive off that. So yeah, this particular gardener that had that grew the best food, she just spent so much time turning her compost, putting dry materials like leaves and brown paper and stuff in there. She'd get coffee grounds from local cafes, and we use the compost, which is organic, from the scraps that we made in the kitchen from the food that we'd grown. And every time she put a new crop in, before she put new seeds or seedlings, new compost would go in there, usually an organic animal manure, and always some kind of mulch like a pea straw or a sugarcane, organic, of course. Yeah, chemicals kill micro, again, just make sure everything's organic. And yeah, every time you're putting new food in, all of those things go in there again: compost, manure, and some kind of mulch. And even if you've got shitty soil on your property, if you keep doing that every season, eventually you're going to end up with really good soil. So yeah, growing the best veggies needs a little bit of love and attention, and that's when you get the best food. I'm not a growing expert, and I do grow veggies at home, and sometimes with mixed results. And I definitely I compost too, and I've got chickens, and the chicken manure goes into the compost too. But the amount of time and energy that I put into my veggie garden waxes and wanes. But I've definitely observed when you're tending to the soil well, which is just really, tending to it with those things I mentioned, you end up with, really abundant garden. So that's the way through. That's it for the questions. I hope this has been helpful. If you've got more questions, shoot them through and I'll compile another one of these in the future. As always, thanks for listening.